Hello, hello. Welcome to AMAZE Live. I cannot believe who we have here on the side by side. Hi, Rosalind. How are
Hi, good
you?
morning.
This is I'm having I know we've talked before, but I'm just such a fan of your work, your multidimensional work. So it's just such an honor to have you here today with us. This is so awesome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for saying multidimensional. So I really appreciate that, actually.
Oh, good. Great. Well, so we have a really interesting topic today that I don't believe we've ever covered here at Amaze. And I just, want to note that we'll be having people joining us throughout the broadcast probably, and then a lot of people watch it later. So I just wanted to encourage anyone who's jumping on to go ahead and drop comments or questions for Rosalind. She's the expert here, just the interviewer. But I would love for you to give a little bit, let's start off with your backstory. I mean, you are obviously a New York Times bestselling author. Your book, Queen Bees and Wannabes, was big enough to be the inspiration for a movie. So, I would love for you to talk a little bit about that and specifically the transition that led to where you are now in your gorgeous Mountain View office space.
So I've been a teacher my whole life, and not my whole life, since I graduated from college. And I started off when I was teaching that I was actually teaching self-defense to girls, which I loved, and I got really involved in college in that. And then I started teaching right after I graduated. And then I was really curious about what was going on with girls, where they were talking about themselves, their identity, their development. And I was always really focused on people's rights versus their responsibilities to themselves and to others. And I also was always very focused on, just because you have rights doesn't mean people are going to respect those rights. Mm. So from a very early age, when I was 22, when I was teaching high school girls, I was really focused on those issues. And I was also working with boys as well. And I was watching, and what was so amazing, and I think this is important for parents when I'm looking back, because I now have teenage kids myself, that I was given the opportunity to do something that was so risky. Like, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was making lots of mistakes, but I was being given the opportunity to make mistakes and then improve it, and make mistakes and improve it. And I didn't exactly know where the path was going to go, but I actually kept working, started a nonprofit when I was in my 20s, and then continued this work, and that became a body of work. And I wrote Queen Bees and Wannabes after about 6 or 7 years of teaching. I wanted to write a guide for parents, for girls. And then several years after that, I wanted to write about parents. So I wrote a book on that. And then I wrote a book about the social lives of boys, because this whole time I had been working with boys just as I had been working with girls. So that's basically what I've been doing this whole time. And I've never stopped talking to kids. So and young people, they continually advise me on the things that I'm not doing right or what I need to do better.
Mm-hmm. And you have two kids, and what's the gender split?
I have two boys. One is actually turning 18 on Monday.
That's a big deal.
It's a really big deal. He's concerned about it too. And then I have one who's 15, and a boy who's 15. And actually also what I'm doing now is I created with a co-founder, Charlie Kuhn, about 2 years ago, a company called Cultures of Dignity, because I wanted to do more work that was more substantive in the way of being able to reach more people. So now we're working in school systems, school districts, parenting communities, so it's got a bigger reach. So I'm doing and writing lesson plans and training teachers all over the country, and actually outside of the United States as well.
That's really cool. Do you want to tell us just a little bit more about the substance of what you're doing there? I mean,
sure. I'll tell you right now. Yeah, right now, what I'm doing is I'm revamping all of the social media lesson plans that we are doing from grades 4 through high school, working with young people to completely overhaul the way that we were doing social media, because I actually think it's one of the ways in which we really do a disservice to young people. There really shouldn't be cyberbullying assemblies and presentations in the country. They're a complete waste of time. And I no disrespect to the people who are doing them, but I know, working with teachers and students, that they have been getting the same information since they were in second grade, and they are totally tuning out, and we're not making it realistic for them. Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing is I'm tying it to media literacy, to social competency, to identity development, to relationships with their parents, so that we can see the connections with how media and social media and technology is affecting our sense of self, and also being able to strengthen our relationships with our parents through the process. So I'm completely overhauling that. I've got a group of teenagers right now that are overhauling our video game contract. And one of the funniest things that they said to me recently is, I mean, maybe this is funny to me, I hope it's funny to the parents, that they're like, can you just tell my mother that I cannot press pause on an online game? That doesn't actually exist. Like, I can't do it.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm like constantly interrupting my kids.
Right. It's just really funny, like these two realities that we live in of like, just press stop playing the game. Like, I can't stop playing the game. So, without actually stopping playing the game. Right. So they're overhauling our video game contract for parents. But that's what we're doing right now. And we're also working with teachers about how to manage themselves better in their emotional, social, and emotional skill building with young people, because teachers, oftentimes, one of the big mistakes that we make in education with any kind of social emotional learning or any kind of teaching, because most teachers don't get this in their teaching programs, is how do I manage myself? How do I manage myself when I get frustrated, when I make a mistake with a kid, when I tease them and I realize that I've made a mistake, that maybe I was sarcastic and I shouldn't have been, or I did something wrong in class? How do I make amends for that and still maintain my authority? What if I get into a battle of wills with a kid? I had that happen to me about 6 weeks ago, where a kid got me so fast that I was like actually pretty genius how she did it to me. And I mean, truly, we need this kind of training. And so we're doing a lot of that for teachers before they go and teach any kind of social emotional character building, anti-bullying stuff in advisory programs or any kind of program. We're teaching the teachers to manage themselves better.
Awesome. That is amazing. Well, just before we I have a bunch of questions for you, but just
okay, ready.
Oops, hold on. I was trying to pop this comment up there, but it doesn't appear to be going. Oh, well, Casey just comments in and says, yes, thank you for this conversation. I shared it in the parent group I lead, hoping others will watch. Thanks, Casey. That's awesome.
Thank you, Casey.
So yes, if you are joining us later, or right now, or later in time from the live, please drop your questions and your comments and your high fives in, and we'll get your questions answered. So you talk a lot to kids, and I wanted to just kick us off. You know, this topic of like what to do if you don't like your kids.
I love this topic.
One is just, I'm so excited we're talking about that, because we've talked a lot about healthy relationships and consent and things like that on the AMAZE channel, but this particular topic, not so much. So I'm curious about what you would recommend about when you talk to your kid about romantic relationships. Like, do you wait till it comes up? Do you start around a particular age? I'm the mom of a 14-year-old who still has showed zero interest in, I mean, we've talked about relationships, but, you know, there just hasn't been a thing. So I'm curious about what your perspective is on this.
Well, I think that, so each child is different. And I think we need to, within your own family, I think that's really important. But I think in general, around the time of 11, 12, that talking to them about relationships is so that in the future, like you might have one, is important. But of course, they're learning about all of this from the time that they're in your family, because they're watching you and they're watching you in your relationships. And, you know, one of the things I think is important is that all relationships are messy. All families are messy. I work really hard on these issues. I'm married, and I have a good relationship, a good marriage. I've been married for 22 years, which does not mean, of course, that my husband and I have not had our significant challenges, and our children have seen that, right? To a certain extent, they've seen that. So, but they've seen us get angry, and they've seen us be really frustrated with each other. So I think the thing that we have to remember is that our children are seeing how we manage conflict. And I think that's incredibly important. And for example, how you apologize. Are you apologizing when you've done something wrong, or are you apologizing because you're trying to like sort of make things peaceful again? I think women have a very big challenge that way, and meaning that sometimes we apologize not because we've done something wrong, but because we want things to be peaceful again. And those are really tricky dynamics, meaning that you don't want girls doing that as they get older, because they will sacrifice their personal boundaries to be able to stay in the relationship. And boys, if they're in heteronormative relationships, it creates those role modeling regardless of their sexual orientation. So I think that's important. They're seeing your relationships. Now, if you've had a relationship that's messy, I think like messy enough that you think I need to talk to my kid about it, you can say, look, I've had some really hard times and I really have struggled. And, your dad and I have struggled, or your mom and I have struggled. And these are the things that I'm working on. You don't need to go into specifics because that's not appropriate, but you can talk about the things that you've struggled with in general and the things that you're working on. Because then your child sees that you are humble enough and that you're open enough to say, this is me, and I'm okay, and I'm strong enough to be able to tackle these issues, and we all have these situations. So I think that's the first foundation. Second is that when your child is, around later childhood, early adolescence, I would sit down with them. This is not going to be a long conversation because that's always weird, right? You want basically the conversations to last like 3 minutes, unless your child wants to talk to you longer. Is to say, hey, I don't know if you're interested in boyfriends or girlfriends. I have no idea, but you know what? Whatever you are, totally fine. I just want to check in with you. It's only going to last like 3 minutes only. But if you had somebody who you really had a crush on, how do you think you would feel? And they, might say like butterflies in my stomach or something like that. You can even say, when I was in your grade, I had that experience of having butterflies in my stomach, or maybe I got all splotchy and that was embarrassing. But no matter what are the things that you really have to have in a friendship? And what are the things you really have to have in a relationship? Because you actually want your child to realize that they're the same thing. Mm-hmm. So you can start off when your child is young by asking, what are the 3 things they have to have in a friendship? And then that gives you the foundation for later, what do you need in a relationship so that you can make the connection for them. So that's what I would start off with. And my experience with young people is they almost always say honesty, loyalty, and be myself. Like I can be goofy around somebody. If they say honesty or loyalty or big words like that, I would ask them what that looks like to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's great. Sorry, I'm getting a little Casey has a question. Do you think there's a difference between apologizing and acknowledging that we could have responded better?
Oh, good question. So I think that what I hear in that question is that there's multiple things that have gone on. So as a mom, for example, if you don't respond well, like to your child or to whoever, you can say like, I'm sorry. Of course you should say like, I'm sorry, I should have handled that better. And say why, right? Like what you could have done. It's helpful. Again, I don't think kids want really long explanations about things because they get overwhelmed with it and they stop listening to us. But they do want like, I snapped at you and I really shouldn't have done that, right? Or I wasn't listening to you because I was staring at my phone and I really should not have done that because I yell at you when you're doing that. So, keeping ourselves honest, I think, is really important. So acknowledgement is an apology. I guess the way I look at it is acknowledgement is part of an apology.
Yeah, I agree. And I can't underscore enough what you were saying. I mean, it's basically modeling when you were talking about, being in a relationship and how important it is to show, the different dimensions. Relationships are complicated and messy, and kids, part of kids evolving into resilient kids who can deal with conflict and understand that, people can have conflict and still love each other. I think it's really important. I mention that again, just because I feel like in this era of modern parenting, there's a lot of, I need everything to be really perfect on the outside. And that's just so not reality.
It's so not reality, and it's so boring and it's so exhausting. Like, honestly, truly, I don't even, as somebody who's, I work a lot on parenting, and I certainly think about it a lot with my own children and my own family. And I don't even know how to even relate to that feeling of this has to be this constant stuff of like, our children are not billboards. I've been embarrassed by my children plenty of times. And I just don't, it's just, we got to have these hard conversations with ourselves and with others and get over this feeling of needing to be perfect.
Agreed. All right. So I have a question. So how do you talk to so let's say you don't particularly care for your kids' love interest. How do you kind of maintain that channel of communication open so they don't pull away or feel like they need to go in defense mode, for that person? What's the kind of, pro tip for communication?
Yeah. Okay. So this is what your friends and your sisters and brothers are for, so that you can call them when you find out that this person is now in your life for some amount of time. When this child is in front of you, in their house, I could talk about this forever, but I'll try and try and not sigh when they walk in the house. Try and not do things because your child is really zeroed in on your reaction. And because they're your child, they know these little microscopic kind of tiny things that you do that indicate that you are not handling this well. Now, we also have to give ourselves some credit here for, like, we're human beings, but try and not sigh, try and not be all, fake and weird and that kind of stuff. Don't interrogate them, no more than like 1 or 2 questions. And really, you're not trying to figure out about like their family, or you don't want to come across as trying to fit them into your social hierarchy of like, are they a good kid or a bad kid? Because there are plenty of kids who look good, who are very complicated, and there are kids who look bad and are really trying their best and really doing a good job of what they've got. So I want to be really clear about that. Your child, I think the thing to focus on is your child is not getting married to this person. And they're not this one person and then having this kind of person for the rest of their life. So this is a moment. It is not a lifetime. So I would really focus on that. Then what I would do is I would say, depending on the like severity of not severity, how mature this relationship is. Right. Is that there are kids I know, and I'm sure there are people who are going to say, well, my kids have dated somebody who they just texted back and forth with and they never actually talked to each other. That can happen, absolutely. But it also means you sit down with your child and say, so if it's just a texting relationship, totally understandable, totally fine. Don't say things like, well, what do you do? Right? Don't ask those kinds of questions like that, because that's not really a question. It comes across as dismissing the relationship. You want to come across as being curious about why they like this person. Your child is intelligent. Like, they like this person for a reason. So just because you don't like them doesn't mean that there are other things that you don't know, that if you did know, you'd think, oh, I get it. I get why my kid likes them. So the most important thing is to come across as, well, you must like them for some reason. So like, tell me what the reason is. I'm really curious about that. And the other part is, by the way, for parents, is that one of the things I've noticed is that there's a lot of children who don't know basic social skills when they walk into a house. And then the other parent, then you get like this child who can barely speak to you and doesn't shake your hand, doesn't say like, thank you, or nice to be here, that kind of stuff. I've had that in my house with girls, and like no social skills. And that it's really hard it's hard to like somebody who has very poor social skills, but we need to remember that maybe they haven't been taught. And so yet again, it's an opportunity to say like, hi, I'm really glad to meet you. I'm X's mom. Like, I'm so glad you're here. Can I get you something to eat? You're not like hovering over them, but you're showing them how to be comfortable in your home. And then, of course, you have to have rules about your home, because as kids get older, they're, of course, going to want to go upstairs, close the door, whatever. So that's natural. It's normal. You have to, if you're parenting with someone, you have to decide beforehand what you feel comfortable doing. And the last thing I would say about that is that the kids that you don't like are probably the ones that have less boundaries about things and are not going to understand rules. And so you're going to have to say, I've had to say to some people, so this is different maybe than the way that you have it in your home. We don't do X in our home, and I need you to respect that. But I'm really glad you're here, and I'm really, really want to get to know you better. And then I leave. And then if they don't respect my rules, then I have to say, like, you're disrespecting our rules, and these are our family values. I've even actually had one of my kids apologize to a girl that was in my house because he wasn't upholding the rules that he knew. So I felt like he was putting her in a bad position. So he apologized to me, and I said, no, actually, first you have to apologize to her, then you can apologize to me.
Very interesting. Okay, so there are a couple threads that come through that related to my next question. And I apologize, I'm hearing some reverb on my side. But so just because you mentioned social skills earlier, you mentioned, kids wanting to be themselves and be their, be themselves, their goofy, authentic selves. So what if you see, or perhaps read like a text thread or whatever, something where your kid is like communicating in a way that's kind of upsetting to you, like either they're just not being themselves, they're being too passive, they're taking too many jabs or whatever. Like, what's the best way to approach that?
Well, I think the setup is that, social media and phones and all that I believe is about graduated freedom. And so you are, giving your child very limited freedom on a phone or texting, and your supervision of that. I don't believe in constant supervision I don't believe in spying on children, because I think it destroys the relationship of mutual trust and respect. And I think that also their incentive to hide something from you is more than your incentive or capacity to actually figure out what they're doing. I've even talked to parents who like are in the industry or like hacking kind of things in the industry, and they can't keep up with their children. And it's not about our ability technology-wise. I think it's about incentive, that children are very focused on creating privacy for themselves, which is developmentally appropriate. And then we're tired. So I think it's just hard. So what I believe is this is about graduated freedoms. And also I think that you have the right, if you are concerned or on sporadic basis, you have the right to look at what they're doing. And if they're doing something that you think, as you said, is false, is that they're trying to please the person, that seems like they're not able to advocate for themselves, that is different, then that's one issue. The second issue is if they do something that is really not good for them and is representing themselves or saying something to them that is actually sort of dangerous or unhealthy for them. So what I would do in that situation is, if it's passive, is I would say, so I looked at your text and this is what I saw. Now there's a couple ways you can play it. You can say, what do you think I think when you read that? Like, you tell me, because you know me, I'm your mom or I'm your dad. You tell me what you think I think when I read that. Why would that be of concern to me? So you want to see how much your child knows about you and your family values and how you've raised them, and how can they process it taking a step back. And then I would connect it back to those friendship values of like, are you able to be yourself? Because if they're being passive and they're being fake, then they're not being themselves. So why? Why do they have to be like that? So you can go back to those friendship rights and those friendship standards they have to have. And then second is if they're doing something that you think is inappropriate, if it's sexually inappropriate, if you think that it's rude, if you're seeing something that you think is aggressive, then I would say, again, what do you think I think about that? And then listen to them and say, here's what I need you to understand. What I need you to understand is this is why this is problematic for me. Now, what this means, and then you're going to say exactly what it is. You're not going to use the word inappropriate because that doesn't, or obnoxious or sort of generalized words. You're going to be specific about what they're doing that you don't like. So that means that you have to prepare the conversation before you get there. So my general rule when I'm talking to my children about something that they're not, or teaching, is I'm going to say three things. What are the three things in that conversation that no matter what happens, I'm going to say? It's going to last for maybe 3 minutes, no more. I am not going to repeat myself. And I'm going to choose the most important thing that I think is really important. So for me, I'll give you a very specific one, is that for me, for the boys my children, I draw a line between, like, if I see texts where bad language is being used, like an F-bomb or something like that, then I'm not going to have as much of a problem with it than if I see like the B word or any kind of race epithet, sexist thing, anything like that, even in joking to anybody, that's where I'm going to have a problem. So I really am clear about sort of my gradation of what I have a problem with. And so if they're being aggressive, if they're thinking they're being funny, but they're not, or if they're being too aggressive with somebody, I'm going to call them out on it. I'm going to tell them why.
I think that's really helpful. And it's kind of a, pick and choose your battles. There are many things that parents could get upset about. And I think that's really crucial. I think it's interesting I loved what you said earlier about, having kids in your home, which is kind of the ideal situation in a way, because they are, they're there, they're like, they're generally supervised, even if you're not hovering over them.
Right.
I think that's a great opportunity to, both model and then also sort of show some boundaries. So let's say this is an in-person situation. I'm taking our previous example of texting, but just if you saw something happening where your daughter's girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever, did something that you weren't cool with, like what's your judgment call on, okay, I'm going to say something, or am I going to horribly embarrass my kid and should I talk to them later? I know it's going to be very different depending on what the situation is, but do you tend to have any you seem to be very good about establishing like basic ground rules. So I'm just curious if you have thoughts on that.
I wonder if my children would say that. There's so many different variations on the theme. And, I want to go back to, I did have this, I'm not going to go into specifics, but I did have a situation where I had a girl that I didn't know very well that was in my house. And this was a situation where I had my child apologize to me. And it was mortifying for her, right? It was embarrassing for her. Like I, invaded their privacy because I invaded their privacy as I should. And in that situation, and it was against the rules. My son knew it. And this wasn't the case of me not liking her. I just didn't know her. And that was odd. And this wasn't, a week ago, this was a while ago. And so I knew that I really had done something that was probably that I knew that I had embarrassed her. Mm-hmm. And when she came downstairs, the way our house is laid out, sort of there's this game room where the kids are able to hang out, not in their bedrooms. That when she came downstairs, when she came downstairs and she came into the kitchen where I was and she said goodbye, like, thanks for having me. I so appreciated that. Takes so much courage for that kid to come and do that. And so for me, I think a lot of parents, maybe you would like look at the situation that just happened and think, oh, that girl, I can't believe she, blah, 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 whatever. And me too. And at the same time, you have to take a step back and realize that there's these little moments that sometimes kids do that you might not know, or you might not think you approve of, or they make you uncomfortable. And you've got to look for like little moments of bravery for them. Because it's so mortifying interacting with parents sometimes. So I think that's an important thing. And for looking for the positive moments and to affirm them and to say, hey, thank you so much. And you are welcome to come back here anytime. And so that's important. And so to answer your question, with all of those different iterations, I think what it is as I do with my students and with my children and their friends over at my house, that if they're saying something that I think is wrong, right? And it's again, like usually joking around about and using words that I do not think are appropriate and are in some way, just some way they're putting somebody down based on some kind of perceived the way they are, right? So like the word retarded or those kinds of things, also not acceptable in my house. And so if I hear those things, I'm going to say something really quick, like, hey, that's not going to fly here. You just know. I don't want it flying outside, but it's not happening in here. It's not happening in my car. It's not happening around me. I love you. These are like really good close friends, my boys, but like, that's not happening. And so I think that's like the moments of intervention that last for a few seconds and then you move on. And then if you really see something that you think is really a problem, then I do think that you stop and you say, hey, this is just what you're doing, and you got to name it, is just not acceptable. And the other part is that sometimes your kid is doing that with their child. Mm-hmm. So it's a really delicate balance. It's a balance, but it's a balance of being able, the thing that I know is that before you do it, before you start talking, you really have to manage yourself first before you start doing something. Yeah. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is your anxiety and your anger and your baggage is going to completely dominate, and they're not going to listen to anything that you say. So truly, yelling and screaming does not work. Being super judgy and nasty doesn't work. It is really saying like, hey, this is what you're doing that I'm not comfortable with, and here's the reasons why. Happy to have you in my house if you can follow the rules.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. And I think that moment of pause before you do anything or say anything is just so crucial. I think in general with communication, that is so important.
Yeah, especially with parenting. I mean, I can tell you, I know if either of my boys were right here right now, they would be laughing because they would think that I'm very challenged in this way.
Well, this is how it goes. So this is crazy. We are almost at the end of our time, which is nuts because I feel like I could talk to you all day. But I do have one question, which you kind of just touched on a second ago when you said, like, in that moment when before you respond, you have to kind of like quickly sort out your baggage. So that's what I wanted to ask you about. This is a really big question, but do you have any simple, a simple recommendation for how you separate your own relationship baggage, if you had something particularly messy or harmful or whatever, from what you see going on with your kid? Like you might have a huge thing in your past and your kid is experiencing a very developmentally normal thing, but you might blow it out of proportion because of your How do you separate that?
Well, I think it's helpful to have a spouse, and that's this is where your relationship is helpful. Like, have I just lost my mind? Am I blowing this out of proportion? And then if the person says yes, you have to listen to that. I think that's an important first step. That's why siblings and best friends are there, because you can say like, hey, this just happened and this is the way I reacted. Am I blowing this out of proportion? And again, you have to listen. But I also think like there could be reasons that you really are worried, like really worried, like as kids get older, like drug abuse or cutting, or I mean, there's a whole host of things that we haven't talked about where there's like serious stuff where your kid is being dragged down basically a hole of crazy like anxiety and trouble. And you are understandably really worried about what's going on. And so if you're in that situation, I mean, I think the thing that you can't do as much as you want to do is say like, you can't see this kid because they're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And so, and even if they didn't do it right there, they're going to find somebody else next relationship that's going to have the same pattern. So to be able to sit down with your child, and if you've had those experiences of any kind, to be able to say, and you got to choose your time, right? It's got to be usually at the end of the day. I don't usually like to talk to kids in a car because they usually do feel trapped, and it doesn't usually work. Mm-hmm. That's depending on the kid, but that's not usually the default place to do it. Look for a place in your life where you have the ability to actually have a small private conversation with your child and say, hey, you know, I actually had some of those, maybe if this is appropriate, I had some of those challenges when I was growing up. So this is a little hard. This is harder for me to see. It's harder for me to see that you bring somebody into the home that has some of the things that I really struggled with. That's hard for me. And it's hard for me not to be really worried about you, because it's understandable to be able to figure out like how much do I care about this person and I want to support them. But at what point is helping them and supporting them start to really hurt me? That is an enormously important life lesson. And so we've got to, and this is the thing that's so painful about parenting, is that when your child goes through that process, you actually have to watch them learn the process. And they're not going to learn it overnight. They're not going to be able to stop the relationship overnight. So, and they might have 2 or 3 girlfriends that are like that, or boyfriends. So to be able to be present with them, to say, this is hard for me. This is what I'm seeing. Be specific about it. How do you feel about it? And then the most important thing, I think, in answer to sort of your question in general, is to ask your child, what are the things that could happen in this relationship where you think it's too big for you to handle on your own? So you don't really know maybe what do you know this kid? You're a smart kid. You know this person. You know your relationship. You know their life. You don't have to tell me everything. And really, you don't need to tell me 100% of the specifics. I just want you to tell me, or even just tell yourself, what are the things that could happen that you say to yourself, this is too much. It's too much for me to handle. And then, of course, who am I going to go to for help? Because you can't do all of this yourself. And that's actually what relationships are about. Relationships are about being able to ask for help when you need it and knowing when to do that. And so that way you're creating this foundation that doesn't have to do with anything about the person that you don't like or you're worried about, influencing your child. And they're developing the social skills to be able to manage it themselves for this relationship and other relationships in the future.
Well, I think that is the perfect way to close, because I think ultimately, as gnarly as some of these relationships can be, like our own, our kids, whatever, I feel like they really are all, social, emotional relationship, communication exercises almost, or practice. So I think that's wonderful. And I'm glad that I'm grateful you brought it full circle like that. Yeah, this was just so wonderful to talk to you, Roz. I seriously feel like we could talk for like another 2 hours, but I
love this topic. I love this topic. I'm sure my children do not like this topic, but my own children. But, yeah, I love this topic.
I know. Well, this was just such an honor and so great to talk to you. And again, if you're coming to this broadcast later and you've got questions for Rosalind, please drop them in the comments and I'll make sure she sees them and tries to answer your questions. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much. Anytime. I'd love to be back.
Awesome. Take care.